I won't disagree with you. And speaking of establishment, I think you get to one of the key points and one of the key problems that the Sunday talk shows have evolved into, and that is they do tend to represent the establishment in Washington. It is a show about having the leading politicians from both parties, the pragmatic members of the Senate or cabinet secretaries or whatnot, on to talk about so that these leaders can sort of talk to one another about establishment issues. And all too often, journalists, in an effort to try and get the highest names possible on these Sunday shows, they will essentially kiss up to the establishment and establishment power, and they will posit and they will promote establishment views. And I think that there's a Sunday show waiting to be done. I wish it was Meet the Press, because I think it would be great for journalism. But instead of having a guy like David Gregory, who essentially I think, as a couple people have suggested, is the personification of Washington establishment in terms of the journalists being fairly close to the people that they cover and socializing and all that sort of thing. Why not have a Sunday show, Meet the Press or one of the others, that has a guy like Glenn Greenwald, who's the host, who is not so interested in having the leading newsmaker of the day and having them be able to amplify their views on a Sunday talk show, but is instead using that platform for the leading news of the day and sticking it to the government and holding government accountable. And then one final point, Dan, and you mentioned advocacy journalism. For people who are concerned about Glenn Greenwald being an advocate and a journalist, he is no different in a sense, and I think he's a vast improvement than compared to, say, Bob Novak on the right. Bob Novak was a columnist. Nobody denied that he was a journalist, and Bob Novak every week in his column issued opinions and analysis and advocacy for certain things. And I don't recall David Gregory or others taking on Bob Novak. In fact, Bob Novak was a featured guest, a revered guest on Sunday shows. He never faced the kind of questions, the kind of antagonism that Glenn Greenwald faced. And that's because, again, Bob Novak was something of a Washington establishment figure who operated in Washington circles while advocating certain issues as a journalist. Glenn Greenwald has the misfortune, I suppose, of being outside of this very sort of cliquey group in Washington. He's not part of Washington. He's not part of the Washington establishment. He is simply working to hold government officials accountable, and that has upset a lot of politicians. It also upsets, as you mentioned, Daniel Marans, it upsets the Washington establishment journalists as personified by too many of the Sunday show hosts that we see each week. Anyway, my take. Maybe things will change. Coming up next, on the other side of this break, how it should be with Daniel Marans, and then perhaps a special guest at the end of the show. You're listening and watching the Take Action News on We Act Radio.